The Urbanist is brought to you in association with the Department of Culture and Tourism, Abu Dhabi. Saadiyat Cultural District Abu Dhabi is a beacon of hope and inspiration. A catalyst to spark growth and collaboration with museums and experiences, where art and science and nature and technology coexist.
The belief of Abu Dhabi that culture is the backbone of our society.
Stay tuned for a special episode of the show, in which you can hear His Excellency Mohammed Khalifa Al Mubarak explain exactly why and how Saadiyat Cultural District Abu Dhabi is the perfect place to collaborate, create and innovate. Saadiyat Cultural District Abu Dhabi, proud partner of The Urbanist on Monocle Radio.
Hello and welcome to The Urbanist, Monocle's programme all about the built environment. I'm your host, Andrew Tuck. On today's episode, how can we build better cities for future generations?
Starting with children, for me, is about the psychological transformation. So a lot of our work is about strategic urban planning and implementation on the ground, which is the physical work. But there's another layer, which is about changing behaviour and about the psychological shift.
This week, we bring you a report from Bratislava, as the city played host to the Start with Children Summit, a two-day event bringing together mayors, policymakers, architects and business leaders to discuss how to create safer and greener cities, with children's health in mind at all times. Because often, a place that is designed with children at its core ends up being more inclusive for all residents. So, where do we begin? I was joined on the ground in Bratislava by Monocle's correspondent Alexei Korolyov. So join us in the next 30 minutes right here on The Urbanist.
Bratislava must be the best in Europe in something. We have good food, but it's all food which is much better in Vienna because they invented that food. And we decided we want to be best Central European city, middle-sized Central European city for kids.
Don't let these words fool you. Matos Valo, Bratislava's bass-playing architect mayor, has already done a lot to put his city on the map. Since getting elected in 2018 and then re-elected in 2022 with an even bigger majority, Valo has been tireless in his campaign to make better public spaces, improve public transport, and encourage the people of Bratislava to take more pride in their city. To do that, he has created the Metropolitan Institute of Bratislava, a city-run think tank for urban change, forged an alliance of Central European mayors, and used his extensive contacts among world-class urbanists to help make his vision a reality. Still, it's a safe bet to say that Bratislava has never seen a gathering like this before. Start with Children, held across 2 days at the end of May, was arguably the first dedicated summit on how to put children's welfare at the heart of urban thinking. Inside Bratislava's beautifully restored Old Market Hall, around 600 people gathered to hear from some 50 global practitioners, planners, activists, architects, mayors, as they pondered what starting with children actually means. Andrew Tuck and myself were there too, to listen and learn. As you'll hear, the answers were many, although there were some recurring themes. The need to clear the streets of traffic, the need to get children off their gadgets, and the need to listen to children's own ideas about how to design better cities. But let's begin with the man who started it all, Bratislava's mayor, Matos Valo. We talked to him after he showed us his latest achievement, a new skate park under the city's iconic main bridge.
Matos, let's start at the beginning. Why start with children? Why this summit was needed?
We decided nearly 4 years ago the theme or the subject of children in the city is going to, for us, be the one of the biggest importance. It's not only because I'm an architect and I believe if you create a right physical space, public space for kids is all right for everyone, but I'm also the father, which it's pretty changing thing.
Now tell me, when you've done that, once you've decided that this is going to be your thing, what kinds of decisions have you been taking through this new lens?
Of course, everything in the city-wise is mirrored in budget. So how much money we are spending for what? That's the first question. Because we used to spend the money for trees, now we are doing trees only from fundraising. We have European monies for sustainable transportation and some European money for everything which is connected to the climate change. But I wanted to see how much money we spend, for example, for safe public space for kids in front of the schools, for example. We have nearly 100 schools. We go through data, we understand there are too many schools which more people are bringing kids with cars than they are leaving them walked. We were asking why. We have many answers, and we start to work with that. We start to spend our money on public space, which is nice, which is okay, it's good for everyone, but it's making the experience of walking to school much safer. And once again, this is just one part of it, but we just opened a new skate park under the bridge, very close to the beautiful National Heritage Park in the center of Bratislava. When we're talking about transportation, or for example, new parking policies, if you drive in a one-way street and you have parking on both sides, you still have many streets in Bratislava, all around the world, where the parking place is few centimeters from crosswalk. In our new policy, you cannot have this situation anymore. We are finding it, trying to change it, because you just don't see a 4 years old child with 90 centimeters high who is standing behind the car. So you have different levels how we are working on it, but also how much money we're spending for our School of Arts. This is also about the children. It's not only about the public space. We are running 12 School of Arts, and we're spending more than 10 millions on making the buildings better, to have like better instruments there. But sometimes we're just repairing toilets, I don't know. But once again, making the experience of our kids just better on every different level.
And it seems you've also learned that people are willing to make changes, to maybe not drive their car so much, to live a little bit in a different way if it is for kids.
The theory works like that. In practical life, need to be honest, we changed the sidewalk in front of the school, but the parents of kids who were coming with cars and wanted to park there were angry that they cannot park in front of schools, even if they knew that it's making the other kids much safer. So I'm in this kind of transition period to understanding like where we are as a society, what's happening. So in our societies, the polarization is just huge. We are looking for something which can unite people. I know it's not going to be bike lanes, I'm sure for that. And not going to be trees neither, but it's looking like everybody in the end is just behind the kids.
And just tell us about the summit. So some 600 delegates, 50 experts come from all over the world to be in Bratislava. What's your hope for the future of this summit?
The first thing is that we are greedy for the new ideas, of course. If you want to be a best city for kids, I want to be also the best city for know-how about how to make best city for kids, you know. So we are trying to start with biannual tradition of a summit for everybody who is dealing with the city and kids. And I'm a mayor. I'm a chairman in different networks, OECD network of champion mayors. I'm a founder of Pact of Free Cities. And this is also the way how to bring mayors to the discussion, because this change is not going to happen without the mayors. Because government, they are doing this big policy making, and it's something like the bigger picture. But the real small change you see every day, and you are using every day, like new crossroads, which is safer, it always depends from the cities, from the mayors. And they were excluded by the conversation. They have their own problems. But this is the important part of that. This should be like new mainstream discussion, the kids.
Petra Marco is an architect, author, and like Matos Valo, a big friend of Monocle. She was recently appointed director of the Metropolitan Institute of Bratislava, and she told Andrew about what this new job means for her and for her city.
Petra, we've met you so many times over the years as an author, writer, urbanist, thinker. Now you're in city government, and we're in Bratislava, and there's this big ambition about starting with children. What does that mean for you in the work that you're doing in City Hall?
Well, indeed, it's been a big jump for me to public sector. I'm now leading the Metropolitan Institute here in Bratislava, and we primarily work for the city, and we are delivering a vision which I have to say at the moment we are in a really great position because the leadership of the city and our mayor is aligned with what we as a professional community, but also I would say as many citizens are demanding, and it's a better quality of life in our city, and that comes down to the way that we build and plan our city and the way that we work with our public spaces. And starting with children, for me, is about the psychological transformation. So a lot of our work is about strategic urban planning and implementation on the ground, which is the physical work. But there's another layer, which is about changing behavior and about the psychological shift. And as the Institute, we're running the City for Kids program, which is engaging children around primary schools into shaping their neighborhoods, rediscovering their neighborhoods in different ways, giving them the freedom to move around independently, and engaging them in different activities to raise an engaged generation, which I think is really important because we are still a young democracy here in Bratislava and in our region.
Well, we're standing in front of the Old Market Hall, an amazing piece of urban infrastructure renewed. We're out here on the plaza. It's almost like a bit of a festival. Kids have been invited here to play, to engage in the city. How important are children in this conversation? You have children yourself. Are they telling you what they need from the city? Are you listening to them as potential advisors on city policy?
Well, I think there are certainly good barometers when it comes to change, because as adults I think that we are less prone or enthusiastic about when things are changing around us. And I think it's really possible to change behavior and to have that psychological shift if we start with children.
If we do start with children, as a principle of planning, give us an example. When you come out of the building, when you walk around the city, what would I see that would be a decision from putting children first?
Well, for me, because I always am relying on cycling infrastructure, is, for example, storage for bikes, especially for kids. You don't want to drag your children's bike from the third or the fourth floor or put it in an elevator. You want to have good infrastructure in your courtyard or outside of your building. You want your children to be able to walk safely when they're a little bit bigger to the nearest bus stop or the tram stop. You want to be able to also trust the culture of drivers, and I think this is a big shift that's still in progress here, because I lived in London for a long time, and I would say that I feel perhaps safer on London streets than I feel on Bratislava streets, so I would not go cycling on the roads in Bratislava, whereas in London I would feel safer because people are already more used to having more volume of cyclists on the streets. Here we are in the process, we are on the cusp of this big change, and there are also those who are fighting against the change or are afraid of the change. It's happening, I think, across Europe, where it's becoming a political issue, bike versus car or pedestrian versus car. But we see the evidence that doing more of this and creating safer environment, particularly through the lens of children and then also elderly people who are also vulnerable, creates a safe environment and welcoming environment for everyone.
And finally, a piece of advice you would give to other people thinking about making their city start with children. What's one of the things that you've noticed in your new role that helps you come to the right decisions about starting with children?
I think it's about priorities, so choosing the right actions, because there's so much we can do, and we heard a lot about it today. Deciding what are the most important things and how can we get there, rather than trying to do everything at the same time. And I think this is a really big task for us as the Institute, because the Metropolitan Institute was set up 5 years ago, and by now it's got 70 people across different professions. We've got a huge advantage of being very interdisciplinary. We've got urbanist architects, but we also have demographers, GIS mapping, we have sociologists, experts in participation, and I think it's critical for us to mark key projects against the principles and values that we believe we should move forward. We have a strategy for Bratislava 2030, which is about caring, accessible and resilient city. That's very high level and big words, but actually behind each of those words are measurable goals and outcomes. So we just have to remind ourselves very regularly whether everything that we're doing on a daily basis is actually contributing to those goals.
Another city working hard to put children first is Tirana, the capital of the Balkan nation of Albania. In 2015, its larger-than-life mayor, Erion Veliaj, carried out an experiment. For one day, he let children take over its traffic-clogged main square. This proved such a success that, despite some very vocal opposition from car owners, he soon made it a pedestrian-only and child-centred environment for good. He told Andrew about how he pulled it off.
Erion, I don't think that, maybe some people know, but outside of this world of urbanism, I don't think people realise how well you've done with Tirana, making it into a child-friendly city and putting children at the centre of the planning process. Just tell us why that happened.
I think it became pretty relevant and known to people that all of us who had terrible childhoods from the 80s and the 90s were growing to become really angry grown-ups. Angry in politics, angry in media, angry in sport, angry in arts. So we sort of started to think, so well, wait a minute. The only thing we have in common is that we were raised in sort of brutal last days of communism or early casino capitalism, no love, no play. And play is a serious business for kids. Then people say, well, there's no kids. Kids don't vote, kids don't pay taxes. You realize if you're officially the youngest capital in Europe, there must be a lot of kids out there. They're probably couch potatoes in their iPads and their iPhones, and the only way to get them out was to endanger them playing between cars. So we started focusing on how kids should really have their place in society. They're also shareholders. They may not pay now taxes or vote, but they will eventually. And then we realized on what a domino effect this had. Building a playground in every neighborhood not only brought the kids out, brought the parents out, it brought the grandparents out. It added to public safety. We haven't added one single policeman on the street since when I took office. But it's much safer now. We don't spend a lot of, we don't have the millions for CCTV and for all the flat screens that track everyone in the city. But grannies do and grandfathers do, and if there's life in the community, if there's a youth concert, and then there's people out in the pubs. And I think in every natural ecosystem, there is an indicative species. You clean a river and you can see the fish coming back. You clean a lake, you can see the ducks coming back. You build a city right, and when you see at 3 a.m. after the pubs, women alone on a bike, that is an indicative species that the city has done something right. That otherwise this species that was bullied because she was a woman, because she was on a bike, because it was late at night, doesn't happen anymore. So it has brought more than just the serious business of play to the epicenter of public life. It has also made the city safer, and it has made the community a lot more cooperative.
You showed a huge enactment of Skanderberg Square, this epic square, the biggest agora, as you described it, in Europe. And you took away all the cars. You gave it initially to like one day to see how it would work. Again, how's that been adopted by people? Because you also showed that there's lots of opposition to all change in Tirana. How has that been adopted now by the city?
It is a canvas. A square should be a canvas. It is not monofunctional. It is multifunctional. So, just yesterday before I left here, on one patch of the square, they were having a street food festival. So everybody brought their food trucks. And then, a group from Basel was doing sort of the Berlin techno rave on another part of the square. And today they're putting the scaffolding because Albania qualified for the Euro final, so it's going to be a mini stadium fan zone. So it's like an origami. It's a multifunctional square. Squares before, at least in my experience, were there for the party leader to vomit their propaganda about how we are, the only success story and the shining beacon of communism. Well, that was a fiasco. The enemy that we built so many bunkers to protect each other from never showed up. So basically now the bunkers have become places of play and places of tourism, and squares, instead of the spewing propaganda, have become places of showing up for life, literally. Not showing up just physically to cross the square, but showing up to be. And the closer the square, it's actually not a square, it's the philosophy of pyramid. And when you're in the center, you're at the same height where the dictator's monument was. So basically we're telling people now, you are the most important guy in town. The average person was elevated as the leader of this city.
Just before we let you go, because the conference is about to begin, just tell us something you think that listeners, other civic leaders in here should take away from this conference. What's the one thing you think is inspiring?
Well, look,
people?
you're a British-based radio and publication, and there's elections now in Europe. I think for voters now, the best question they can ask themselves is, what is this person done or can do for my children? And if you look at every politician with that lens, to make a big difference. If you look at the populists who are talking about inflammatory rhetoric, how does that help your kid? And what has it done for your children? If you see someone that said, no, wait a minute, he's good in schools, and he can deliver on the meals, he really gets it that in the early 3 years, kids get their formation. He understands that, kids that can play in a team will become better adults and not angry politicians. If they can answer that question, Europe can make wise chances in the voting booths.
Closer to home, for me, that is, me being Monocle's Vienna correspondent, Maria Vasilakou was the Austrian capital's deputy mayor between 2010 and 2019. She now runs a consultancy called Vienna Solutions, exporting her successes abroad. So during your stint as vice mayor in Vienna, of course, you were famous for pedestrianizing Vienna, for making it more livable, for creating shared spaces, what you call Kretzeloasen, small parklets. How important are these places for children in a city and in Vienna specifically?
Well, children have been more or less banned from public space for several decades because public space was designed around the needs of cars, but never around the needs of people, regardless the needs of children. Rethinking the street means realizing that the street is the river of life in our cities, and that gaining space, reallocating space that is right now mostly occupied by parking cars, in order to give it back to the people and children, to allow for them a childhood where they are able to go out in front of the front door and play and move around freely and safely and enjoy outdoor life is extremely important, not only for the children themselves, but for us all, because it means a happy, healthy city.
So the name of the panel that you were just part of was Designing with Children. And, over the course of the conference, there was a lot of talk of involving children in designing spaces and cities. But how realistic is it? I mean, how can children be city planners?
I think it is about realizing that once you want to plan space and place collaboratively, you cannot exclude the children, really. Now, there is numerous ways of doing that. First and foremost, you can do it involving the children and the carers as well. So, in most cases, participatory processes will be for young families, but children will be also, on the one hand, observed in order to see how they behave in public space, what their needs are, and to then arrange design around the results of the observation. And on the other hand, by simply asking them what is fun, what they don't like doing, and what they would wish for. And most of the times one finds out that they wish for very practical things.
But also, a lot of the time you find that, children want one thing, but their parents want something completely different. So there's a conflict. So how do you deal with that?
Well, how about designing places that are there for both? So how about designing a wonderful place, playground example given, that provides elements for the children that are fun, and it's a playground where they love to be? And how about then looking into the needs of the accompanying parents, because mostly it's the parents, and designing a playground that's good and fun for them too. Copenhagen is an excellent example, by the way, where they introduce play elements for grown-ups as well, because they have found out that if the playground is fun, parents tend to spend longer time there with the children and not just look at their watch and hurry back home as quickly as possible.
Somebody who knows a lot about fun and about designing child-friendly spaces is Gil Penaloza, one-time director of Parks and Recreation in his native Bogota, the capital of Colombia, and now the head of urban reform group 880 Cities. In his talk, he urged civic leaders not to fear what he called cave people, or citizens against virtually everything, and just be firm.
Change needs champions. I've never seen any change without a champion, at any level. Once I went to a school in Canada, an elementary school, even with very cold winters, and one of the teachers decided to shut down the parking lot. and make that area for children before school. And she put some pylons, and she was the champion. And then initially, many parents were upset, whatever, and she dressed up as a pylon, and she was saying, good morning, good morning. So even small changes at the school level like that requires a champion. Champion is not necessarily the mayor. In some cases, like in Tirana, it has been led by the mayor. In other cases, like Melbourne, it was led by the chief architect, Rob Adams. In some other places, it's led by citizen organizations. But there always has to be a champion. Things do not just happen. It can be a citizen, it can be a city staff, it can be an elected, but without champions, nothing happens.
You consider yourself a champion of change, because I imagine you're doing a lot of these conferences, you come and do these talks, trying to convince people to make the change. Why is it taking so much convincing?
Because change is hard. People don't understand that the cost of doing nothing is not nothing. And if I consider myself a champion, yes, I think in many ways. One, I led the construction of over 200 parks. Also, I led the open street in Bogota that was only a few kilometers and a few thousand people, and I turned it into the world's largest pop-up park, 121 kilometers every Sunday. And things don't just happen. When I left in the last 25 years, that has not increased one single meter. So that's one of the things I tell cities. Whenever there is change, do as much as possible. Because sometimes the stars are aligned, you got either the right mayor or the right commissioner and things happen, and then maybe nothing happens in the next 10 years.
And finally, let's hear from Colly.
That is very difficult.
She can do it.
I know.
Colly Foyani and Lais Fleury, two women running NGOs that encourage children to engage more directly with nature. Black Girls Rising in South Africa for Colly and Alana in Brazil for Lais. Their core message is that while building parks or planting trees is always a good idea, that by itself is not enough.
Often, like when we talk about urban planning, it's often bringing things in spaces. And we don't talk about how to interact with those things. So good enough, yes, it's good to build parks and trees, but trees are not going to cultivate a sense of reconnecting to nature for kids. There needs to be an intervention. There needs to be someone facilitating that process. And I think our panel was really highlighting just that need of having that intervention, of really prioritizing that reconnection to nature, because we believe like once we have that, we could solve some of these issues that we're battling with.
During the discussion, you talked a lot about your own experiences, your own childhoods, growing up in Brazil, growing up in South Africa. But this idea of reconnecting with nature, of fostering this connection between children and nature, is it context dependent? Does it depend geographically where the city or the place that you're talking about is? Or is it something more universal?
Unfortunately, is universal. It's not something like that it's based in Brazil or based in South Africa. It's the entire world, unfortunately. It's facing this, especially now that we are also having a very hyper-connected society. Kids are more into the screen than outside. So unfortunately, it's a very standard problem and challenge that the entire world is facing right now. Yeah. So I don't think it's something like locally.
Yeah.
So you both have activist organizations. Both of these organizations involve children.
Yes.
How do you encourage children to become activists? How do you make an activist out of a child?
I think, first of all, is education. Educating them about what is currently happening in our climate, and to really create a space for them to know that they are not the cause. And I find often, like, when they find that those links of like, okay, I'm not the cause, there's someone causing this, and I have the power to use my voice to call them out, and often there's this yearning of like wanting to take action. Yeah.
In my point of view, is just to offer opportunities to kids to be exposed to nature, to have good experience in nature. This foundation, this love of nature, when you are a child, if you really nurture this connection and also expose kids to having a direct contact with nature, is the best way to make sure that they are going to take care of the environment, because you only take care of what you love and what you love. Because if you have this love of nature, if you care of nature, then you naturally fight and be more aware of your attitude and your decisions, and what options that you do throughout life, that it's going to be more environmental friendly.
There were many more speakers and many, many more discussions and meetings. I don't know about Andrew, but I was quite exhausted by the end. But I really felt that we learned something. Above and beyond all the wonderful examples of urban transformation that we heard about, there was one simple but very important takeaway. Change is hard. And even if, as a mayor or activist, you succeed in pushing through change, there's inevitably going to be resentment and resistance, often unpleasant, sometimes violent. But if you do what's right, not what's popular, and if it's right for children, then inevitably it will be right for everyone.
And that's all for this week's episode of The Urbanist. My thanks to Alexei Korolyov for this report and additional production on the ground in Bratislava. He makes a good travel companion. You can get new episodes of the show every week. Just follow us via your favourite podcast provider. And remember that you can also subscribe to Monocle magazine for regular reports on all things design, architecture, and of course, urbanism. Just head over to monocle.com. The Urbanist is produced by Carlos Rebello and by David Stevens, who also edits the show. I'm Andrew Tuck. Goodbye, and thank you for listening, City Lovers.